crazy. Slow down, don't violate the road code. Talk about you babble no proud. Whether car, bicycle or truck, no. What? No red light, nothing you broke, no. And when you in at the traffic and stop, no. And no time for message about post no photo. Remember say drink and drive is a no-no. Listen when me tell you no, you can't say you don't know. Yeah, slow down. So for the season, what them call the silly season. Slow down, you hear me?
This is an important message.
Just slow down. A message from JNGI and the Jamaica Automobile Association. Slow down.
This is an important message from JNGI and the Jamaica Automobile Association.
Them time of year, yeah, the road get crazy. So for the season, slow down. Don't violate the road code. Talk about you babble no proud. Whether car, bicycle or truck, no. What? No red light, nothing you broke, no. And when you in at the traffic and stop, no. And no time for message about post no photo. Remember say drink and drive is a no-no. Listen when me tell you no, you can't say you don't know. Yeah, slow down. So for the season, what them call the silly season. Slow down, you hear me?
This is an important message.
Just slow down. A message from JNGI and the Jamaica Automobile Association. Slow down.
This is an important message from JNGI and the Jamaica Automobile Association.
Them time of year, yeah, the road get crazy. So for the season, slow. Don't violate the road code. Talk about you babble no proud. Whether car, bicycle or truck, no. What? No red light, nothing you broke, no. And when you in at the traffic and stop, no. And no time for message about post no photo. Remember say drink and drive is a no-no. Listen when me tell you no, you can't say you don't know. Yeah, slow down. So for the season, what them call the silly season. Slow down, you hear me?
This is an important message.
Just slow down. A message from JNGI and the Jamaica Automobile Association. Slow down.
This.
Good evening, everyone. Let me begin first with the salutations for this evening, beginning with Dr. Dana Morris Dixon, General Manager of JN General Insurance, members of the media, and valued members and customers of the JN Group as well. Our panelists for this evening, Superintendent of Police, Winchester Watson of the Jamaica Constabulary Force, Mrs. Deidre Hudson Sinclair, Director of the Road Safety Unit, Mrs. Andrea Gordon Martin, Assistant General Manager of the JN General Insurance, Mrs. Rose Miller, Grants Manager at the JN Foundation, Ms. Dial Wiley of the Jamaica Automobile Association, Ms. Yannick Wilson, a crash survivor. Ladies and gentlemen, everyone who showed up here this evening, good evening. Welcome to you all, and thank you for joining us for what we promise is going to be a useful solutions-driven webinar on the theme Road Safety, Stop the Mayhem and Save Lives, brought to you by JN General Insurance. I'm Archibald Gordon, and I'm going to be your moderator for this evening. Now, to set the tone for the discussion, for the conversation that we're going to be having this evening, and we want to emphasize that it's a conversation. So we are live streaming on the JN Group's platforms on YouTube. We're going to be live tweeting as well. And we are welcoming your questions and your comments in the chat as well, because as we said, it's a conversation. So we want to set the tone for that conversation by starting our proceedings with blessings from above. And so I would like to invite Mrs. Rose Miller, Grants Manager at the JN Foundation, to ask the Lord's blessing on our webinar. Mrs. Miller.
Indeed, Archibald, thank you. Let us pray. Father, we just thank you that you are awesome God and you love us with an everlasting love. We thank you, Lord, for giving us the opportunity as a group to put on this webinar so that we can raise awareness, so we can have the conversation, Lord, as to how we can keep safe on our roads. We just commit this session into your hands. We commit every person who will join us in the session into your hands. And we pray, Lord, that when we have left this afternoon, we would have left with solutions, with a resolution in our hearts, Lord, that we are going to make a difference. We will make a difference in the way we use our roads. We will make a difference, mighty God. And so we thank you, Lord, for giving us this opportunity. And we pray your blessings upon this evening's proceedings. Invite your presence and the presence of your Holy Spirit to lead, to bring guidance and direction, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. And thank you so much, Mrs. Miller, for that prayer. And again, I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening. Let's start by talking about where we are right now. So the statistics provided by the Road Safety Unit show that road traffic deaths have exceeded 400 yearly over the past 3 years in comparison to the period from 2008 to 2018. Last year, road fatalities soared to 487. And this year is already shaping up to be another deadly year. And 247 persons have died on our roads as of July 13. So the carnage, and I think it's quite safe to say that the carnage on our roads underscores the importance of this discussion, but we're also going to be looking at solutions on how we can stop the mayhem on the roads. So before we introduce our panelists, I'm pleased to introduce our host for this discussion, the General Manager of JN General Insurance, Dr. Dana Morris-Dixon, who will officially welcome you. Please welcome Dr. Morris-Dixon.
Thank you very much. Our chair, Mr. Archibald Gordon, our panelists, thank you all for being here today. Members of the media, employees of JNGI and the JN Group would be nowhere as an organization or as a group without you. So I have to acknowledge all these wonderful employees across the group. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. 245 lives and counting, that's the count this year, are too many lost to the carnage on our roads. These deaths from crashes also have a domino effect on families, friends, and the workforce. On behalf of the JN General Insurance Limited, we are happy to host this event, Road Safety, Stop the Mayhem, Save Lives. A discussion of this nature is important to help us to arrive at collective solutions that will put a stop to what is aptly described as mayhem on our roads. The JNGI team believes that this webinar will provide valuable information to equip persons with the knowledge and right attitudes to make a positive change in their outlook on road safety. This focus on road safety is nothing new for us at JN and the broader JN Group, for JNGI and the broader JN Group. Our group CEO, the Honorable Earl Jarrett, has served for many years on the Road Safety Council. And we at JNGI have been committed through that association to implementing things such as the traffic hotspots, billboards that we saw all over Jamaica, pointing out where there were these hotspots for accidents. We worked collaboratively on that with Paris Leo AI and the Mona Geoinformatics. Things that we're proud of is actually in an analysis of this data and of the crash data, that a number of the original hotspots are no longer on the list of top areas for accidents. So we're very proud of that. And it also buoys us to do a lot more. So we're currently working to refresh those crash hotspot billboards with broader safe driving messaging, and these will be rolled out very soon. And I know in my former life as an economist, I can't help but to reflect on the severe impact road crashes place on our development. It's not just something we talk about, it has deep impact on lives. When a breadwinner is taken from a family, the quality of life of the entire household is worsened, especially the quality of life of many of our low-income families. Survivors may have long-term injuries that prevent them from working, which affects not only productivity, but also places a strain on the families that they once provided for, as the breadwinners now become the dependents. In addition, road crashes place a severe strain on our limited healthcare resources. According to data from the WHO, road traffic injuries cost governments around the world between 1% and 3% of gross national product annually. In Jamaica, a cost of care study, which was published in collaboration with the JN Foundation, I have to say hi to Rose again, and the National Health Fund, established that the direct medical cost and indirect cost to productivity associated with 13,000 road traffic crashes treated in hospitals in 2014 amounted to $3.2 billion. That's a lot of money when we think about a country with lots of needs in education, in crime fighting, in so many, in healthcare generally, to have to spend this money on these crashes that are often due to things that we had control over. It's really not the best use of resources in our country. We truly believe that a change in behavior and attitude can stem the carnage, but this must be backed up with enforcement, and enforcement is an area that we are very much going to be focusing on in the conversation here. And just generally, I know today I was, because I was doing this seminar, I was looking at what was happening on the road, and I feel that every time I go on the road, it feels traumatic. I saw today, just today, two people coming from minor roads onto major roads, just coming out, and you're having to be defensive in that. The overtaking, the reckless overtaking. I had that on many occasions today. The incorrect use of a four-way. You didn't come there first, but you're going through first, right? And the unending running of the red light. It is truly mayhem. I think we chose the right word when we were thinking about this conference. So we therefore welcome the House of Representatives passing of amendments to the Road Traffic Amendment Act to facilitate the implementation of the long-awaited road traffic regulations. And we spoke about implementation, right? And we look forward to its enforcement and the implementation of other national initiatives that will educate and stimulate behavioral and attitudinal changes to road usage and safety. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining this conversation, which promises to be an informative discussion. We look forward to the solutions that will be proposed and the actions that will be undertaken. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Morris Dixon. Some very sober words there, and a lot of really important areas that we're going to be covering this evening. That issue of enforcement is really, really important. That issue of the impact of road traffic fatalities and just crashes overall, not just on the persons who are involved, but on families, also very, very important. And I know there's a lot of work done in that area. We'll also get a sense of that impact on an individual when we hear from the crash survivor later on in segment 3. But for this segment, we're going to be starting our segment 1 in a moment. But before that, we're going to be inviting you to participate in a poll. So at this time, I'm going to be asking you to participate in the poll that's going to be showing up on our screen in a moment. It's just going to take a couple of seconds, or less to complete. The question is, have you ever been involved in a road crash? You can, 2 answers right there, yes or no, and you can also share your experience in the chat as well. So just giving everyone a little bit more time to respond to the poll that we have up. And the question is, have you ever been involved in a road crash? I suspect it's probably a lot of people. All right, so the response is 63%. Whoa, have you ever been involved in a road crash? We have had 35 votes, 22 people, that's approximately 63% of persons saying yes, they've been involved in a road crash, and 13, that's approximately 37% of the respondents saying they have not been involved in a road crash, but perhaps not at all surprising that there's a large number of people saying that they have been involved in a road crash. Again, 63% of respondents saying they've been involved in a road crash, and 37% saying that they have not been involved in a road crash. Thank you so much for participating in the poll. And that very much sets the stage for discussion number one that we're going to be having this evening. With us are key stakeholders in road safety and the insurance industry who are going to be giving us an overview of what's happening on our roads. Why are so many people involved in road crashes? And this involves issues such as the discipline, road fatalities, the impact on the insurance industry. Those are some of the issues that we're going to be covering in this discussion. I'd like to introduce our panelists. They are Superintendent of Police, Winchester Watson, who is currently the commanding officer for the Traffic Enforcement Division. Good evening, Superintendent. Or joining him is Mrs. Deidre Hudson Sinclair, who is Director of the Road Safety Unit. Mrs. Sinclair has worked in the transport and agricultural industries as well as in education. And our third panelist is Mrs. Andrea Gordon-Martin, Assistant General Manager of General Insurance, who has more than 15 years of experience in the insurance industry. Ladies and gentlemen, as outlined during the introduction, road fatalities have been increasing and there appears to be mayhem on the roads. We want to hear from our panelists, how bad is it in terms of road crashes, road fatalities, and the general indiscipline on the road? So I want to start with Mrs. Hudson Sinclair first, Director of the Road Safety Unit. First, just to set the stage for us in terms of what you're seeing in terms of the statistics this year compared to last year.
Well, you know, I want to say thank you to JNGI for the opportunity and my fellow panelists, SP Watson and Mrs. Andrea Gordon. Thank you for inviting the Road Safety Unit to this conversation. And we all have seen the statistics. We are trending in the wrong direction, and that's upward. And what we have noticed in terms of fatalities is that when we look at the main causes for fatalities, we recognize that driver error plays a major part. Now, the truth is that road safety is not just drivers. It has a lot to do with environment and the road that we drive on, weather conditions. But the one thing that road users can control is their own activities. And that's why the road safety stresses on, public outreach and engaging our road users. So when it comes on to PMCs this year, you can recognize that we have had an increase in private motor vehicle crashes and motorcycle crashes, which predominantly is the largest group in terms of road users killed, usually representing over 30%, is followed by private motor vehicle drivers and then pedestrians. So these are the major groups. But if we also take into consideration that motorcyclists and pedestrians are vulnerable road users, meaning that when they're on the roads, they have the least amount of protection. If they represent 30 and 20% of fatalities, that's 50% in total. So we recognize that our vulnerable road users are at risk. And we recognize that our motorcyclists are at risk. And when we look at human error, we recognize for motorcyclists, there's a lack of use of protective devices, the helmets. And that is one major issue that is really compounding the matter for motorcyclists. And then that is followed by the other protective gears. I know we've been stressing on helmets. However, there are other things that go along, which adds to the equation that Dr. just alluded to, which is the injury. So we have a lot of young men who are now disabled because they're now amputees. And these young men have homes and families that they need to take care of. And we recognize also that a large part of our fatalities group are within the ages of 15 to 39. As a matter of fact,
people
are productive working citizens, even for females. And I want you to take into consideration when it comes to the mayhem on the roads, over 80% of the fatalities are men. The other remaining 20% are females. And within that grouping, they are really dying between the ages of 15 to 39. So, we're losing a lot in terms of productivity, human resources. And when we take a deep dive into, let's say, pedestrian fatalities, we recognize that, and I'm sure everybody has been noticing that as pedestrians, we seem to be a little bit more aggressive. we seem to be having a lot more risk taking, especially in urban areas where we have pedestrians not really taking caution to where they're walking and where they're looking. So when we break down the statistics, we recognize that a lot of the fatalities are contributing to persons walking into the road, veering off the verge or the pedestrian path.
Before you continue, let's just take this groups in stages for a
Sure.
moment. You talked about driver error.
Yes.
What do you mean? What are you talking about?
Okay, so for driver error, we have main causes broken down into, if I'm to bring it up here, we have excessive speeding. So when we took we're in road safety unit really holds a national database. So we looked at the main causes from 2021 to 2022, and we looked at around 506 crashes at this point in time from last year, July 2021 to now in 2022. And we recognize that 31% of these crashes were attributed to excessive speeding.
So that would be that's the number one cause.
That's the number one.
So out of every, we said 31%, you're talking about 1 in 3. So out of every 3 accidents, number one cause, driver speeding.
Then the other one is failure to keep to the near side, or failure to keep your proper traffic lane. And that happens predominantly among our motorcyclists.
So this is people driving where in the middle of the road when they should be over to the other side?
Yes, keeping to their side, the near side, the left side. So they're verging into the middle of the roadway and coming and impacting on the other person, the oncoming traffic or in the opposing lane. So that represents 18% of our fatalities. Then we have pedestrians walking or standing in the roadway, which represent 8%. So you see how these large numbers, when we break them down and we see where the human error comes in, it has a significant role to play in how our fatalities and injuries are taking what's happening on our roadways.
I want to bring in Superintendent Winchester Watson in a moment, but there's one question I want to ask you before we move on to him about the category that you raised first. You talked about PMC, and so you're talking about private motor car drivers.
Yes.
How do these compare to people? How do to people who are driving for commercial reasons? So whether you're running a taxi or you are transporting goods, etc. How do those numbers compare?
Okay, well, this year we had quite the anomaly, because the truth is, when we look at commercial motor vehicles, although they're on the road regularly, they really don't have a major footprint in terms of fatalities. But unfortunately, this year we have lost 7 CMC drivers, and that is compared to last year at this point in time where we had 2 CMC or commercial motor vehicle driver fatalities. And when we actually decided to take a look at these commercial motor vehicles, what were the main causes for these 7 crashes, we recognize that 3 out of 7, the main cause that the police had attributed to the crash was failing to keep to the near side, and the other 2 were excessive speeding. So that is over 50%. That is 5 out of 7. So we recognize that once again, the main causes for these CMC drivers, unfortunately, and how they lost their lives were contributed to excessive speeding and failure to keep to the near side. So, and then the others were, failing to turn around properly or negligently, and apparent error in judgment. And this is the unfortunate situation that we're facing now in terms of CMCs. And it speaks to us really, the road safety unit now, looking at commercial drivers, the times that they're driving, possibly pressure to, arrive on time. It speaks to, the matter of delivering on time and speed. So, there's lots of work to be done, not only in the private sector, but in the public sector. And I know persons are of the opinion that, public sector, private public motor vehicle carriers, though meeting a lot of crashes, they have a lot of serious crashes that don't necessarily fall into fatalities. And when they do have fatalities, it usually are multiples. And unfortunately, we have more than one person usually losing their lives in, public passenger vehicles, and that ought not to be, because they ought to be held to a higher standard.
All right, I'm going to bring you in a little later on as we continue to have this discussion, but I want to bring in Superintendent Winchester Watson here because, you know, not just statistics for him, but I imagine the police are responding to these. So they're seeing these actual crashes on the road, Superintendent. And you're seeing these sorts of scenes on the road. How are you first of all, how are the police dealing with this? Superintendent, I think you're muted.
Good evening, Archibald and the other panelists here. And I did not get your question.
I was asking, first of all, before we get into the meat of it, how are the police dealing with this? Because these are large numbers. You have to go to these scenes. What kind of impact is it having on you and the members of your team? Well,
I must be honest with you. We have personnel who across the island who will have to treat with all these crashes, and especially the members from the accident reconstruction unit. They visit all of these major accidents or fatal accidents. So from time to time, we have our in-house counseling sessions that have to treat with that aspect of it. But we tend to cope very well over the years. We understand what is happening, and more so, it's challenging, but day by day, we tend to be able to manage.
Let's talk a little bit about what you're seeing on the roads in terms of the actual numbers and the groups which are affected. So we know that some of the biggest culprits or the groups most affected, perhaps is a better way of putting it, are, commercial motor vehicles. We know private motor vehicles as well. What are you seeing in terms of the impact on these sorts of groups?
Well, I must tell you, the largest group is the motorcyclists. And as you know, that what is actually happening is that category of drivers, most of them are not trained. Because what happens in the old Road Traffic Act is that you just go to the collector of taxis and you purchase a learner's. You purchase a motorcycle, you hit the road without any form of training. Now, you realize that even though they are there driving the cycles, if they would drive within the speed limit, at times when they have the collisions, they may be safe, but they are not driving within the speed limit. So even though if you are even trained properly and you are wearing that safety helmet, the excessive speed at which they travel, you will realize that it's something for us to think about. When you have an impact, it is less likely for them to survive. And if you notice over the period of COVID, there's a large influx of motorcyclists who came on board because they were transporting, food for persons.
They were delivering.
They tend to race because it's for profit. So at times, the speed at which you see them traveling, that, listen, if they had a collision, they're not gonna make it. Now, even in the western part of Jamaica, that, especially Westmoreland, and over those areas, you have the bike taxis, and they are predominantly used to have pedal cycles. Now, the growth has been happening, and they go and they purchase motorcycles. Without any formal training, they are very vulnerable. The fact is that the Road Safety Council, along with the JSF, would have went into the western section of the island, and they would have carried out some intervention, which would have seen us, teaching a number of motorcyclists the proper way to use the road, to bring them through the road code, and they were issued with helmets. And we see where it would have reduced the fatality rate last year somewhat. But for some reason, at times, it just get out of hand again. In the corporate era, what we notice is that some of these persons, they tend to be transporting pillion riders who should not be even on the motorcycle. Because if you are not the owner of a motorcycle driver's license, you shouldn't be carrying a pillion on a cycle. And that is what is happening. And most times, the pillion is the person who is most likely to be hurt, because even if the drivers are wearing the helmet, at times the pillion is not wearing the helmet.
So that's
I must even continue on saying this. From time to time, when we try to stop these motorcyclists to really even intervene, they will not stop. They will turn against the one way. They will drive on the sidewalk just to elude the police. And if what I can tell you that we have issued over 2,000 tickets to drivers of motorcycles for failing to wear their headgear for the start of the year. But it's just for those who are willing to stop when the police stop them.
Wow. Driving on the edge. I wanna move to talk about some of these other groups, and I'm seeing some of the comments in the chat as well. Brian Miller, for instance, saying stop behind a vehicle, which was waiting to turn right across a 2-lane road, and my vehicle was hit from behind. Clunis in the chat saying something has to be done with regard to training for all the users of the road, especially taxi drivers. And I want to bring up that issue of taxi drivers and perhaps as a wider category, commercial motor vehicles or public passenger vehicles. What are you seeing in terms of how they feature in traffic crashes?
All right, so persons who drive a profit, you know, that would be the PPV drivers and the CMC drivers, they tend to try to do whatever they are doing with excessive speed. So if a man is being paid based on the amount of trip that he makes, he would try to do as many trips in a shorter period of time in comparison to a person who is just driving to work. And in the corporate area, you can see, for example, those taxi drivers who apply the Mullines Road, the Red Hills Road, the Washington Boulevard, they tend not to want to wait in traffic. So we have to be out there ticketing them, putting them before the court. But the end result is that a number of them, they are ticketed, they refuse to pay the ticket, but they continue to drive. And that's the issue we're having right now. A number of them who are there driving now should not be on the road driving.
I want to bring in here Ms. Andrea Gordon-Martin, who is Assistant GM for JN General Insurance, because I want to find out the impact of all of these sort of statistics on your industry in particular. I imagine they're of great concern to you, but why?
Okay, thank you, Archibald. Now, our industry in 2021, we recorded 54,000 motor vehicle accidents, and a lot of accidents are not reported. The cost of these accidents to the industry was $14.5 billion. And we estimate that of that, about $4 billion related to bodily injuries and fatalities. So you can see the high cost of motor vehicle accidents to the industry. And this cost does not include the loss of productivity from the deaths, the fatalities, and the disabilities. It doesn't include the burden on the health sector, as was mentioned earlier. It does not include the hardship that people face while they wait on their matters to go through what we have as a relatively slow court system. All of those costs and more not included in those numbers. It is obvious that the more accidents we have, it's the more the cost it will be to the industry. And the more serious accidents use up a lot of our resources, and they usually end up in the court system. We see with the increased sophistication of vehicles nowadays, a simple fender bender is extremely expensive because the cost of spare parts is so expensive and the cost of labor. So we're finding that we have to write off what we call a constructive write-off or an economic write-off of many of the vehicles involved in accidents because it's just not economic to repair these vehicles. So the cost is tremendous. The industry cannot sustain this. It's just not sustainable. But how do we cope? By increasing premiums.
I was about to ask that.
That is the repercussion. That is the repercussion, Archibald. We have to increase premiums. And the good suffers for the bad, because insurance is a pooling mechanism. Everybody, all the premiums are pooled. Not everybody will have an accident, but we all suffer. So we cannot insulate the good people and the good drivers from the increases in premium. So if we observe better driving habits all around, I think collectively we can bring down the cost of insurance in this country.
I imagine this also has an impact in terms of the claims as well, because of in terms of how you have to dedicate particular resources to dealing with those. What kind of impact are you seeing there?
It's more and more, it's difficult to cope, because with the increase in claims, we have to be employing more staff. No, that's a good thing, because employment is good, but then again, it's adding to your administrative costs. And therefore it's a cycle. It comes right back around to the consumers having to pay for the increase in all of these costs. So it comes right back around to us, the consumers, having to pay for it. And as I said before, the good suffers for the bad behavior.
I want to bring back Deidre Hudson Sinclair here, because one of the mechanisms for dealing with this has been just the dealing with the legislation itself and the actual regulations. And there have been complaints about the pace at which this has been done. That was one of the complaints made on a tweet, a post that I put on the internet, just to get people to share some of their own experiences. How do you respond to concerns about that, about the pace at which it has, the time it has taken us to amend the legislation, particularly in relation to the regulations for the Road Traffic Act?
And as a citizen and a driver, I understand completely. It's hard and it's long, and we've been waiting for this for so long, but it is important that we get it right. And transportation is such a broad cutting industry. Not only we hear insurance, we hear enforcement, we hear, for road safety, it's all about post-crash care. How are all these mechanisms? It has a lot to do with, and let me wait for that bike to pass. I don't know if you heard it in my background, but things like ITA, the Island Traffic Authority, looking at vehicle standards and ensuring that it's right. The tax authorities, in terms of the collection, the processes, it's wide, it's intricate, and it also in ensuring that when we have the law right, that we have some of the processes in place to support what we're putting down. And that's why it has put down some of the regulation and act on paper. We have to ensure that once we've put this and enforced this, it actually works. So having all of these stakeholders across the board speaking the same language, understanding the processes, it takes time. And, it's unfortunate that it is taking this long, but I assure you, when we are getting enforced and we're rolling, we should reap the benefits of the labor. So I understand completely, but we have to get it right, and it cuts across so many industries that it takes time. And even waiting for other organizations to ensure that their regulations can meet it, as well as our technical expertise. So, it's long awaited, but we are getting there, and the regulations passed this week. So, we're making some strides quickly now that we've gotten this in place.
I want to bring back Superintendent with Winchester Watson here as we prepare to wrap this segment to move on to the next segment and talk about some of the additional changes that you'd perhaps like to see, or the kind of impact you expect that these changes will have.
Well, again, I will say that the fact that the intention is to have some of our major intersections fitted with camera, and the owner of these vehicles have to take responsibility, then we would see some change, because you as a owner would definitely screen the drivers that drive for you, because it may seem hard, but at times, if the owner would be checking up on his asset on the road, then he will realize that the person who is driving for him should not be driving. Because a number of times owners tend to come in or to the station here and request the background check on the drivers. And when they realize the number of tickets that are outstanding, there and then, it's a no-no. So owners need to take some more responsibility as to who they employ to drive for them. But if we're talking road safety, Archibald, it's more than just the legislation, you know. The roads that we are using, we need to look at what is happening. There are a number of roads that the marking doesn't exist. And if we are talking about the second category, which is failing to keep left, on the rural roads, if it doesn't have proper marking and you have overgrowth, then a driver would tend to keep to the middle of the road. And if the road narrows, then we're going to have collisions. So we need to get on board, get the signage up, get the markings up, the potholes, they are contributing factors also. A number of times, accidents would have happened because of a blown out tire, but maybe we don't even realize that there's a pothole that would have contributed to the accident. So these things we need to put into perspective, and the other agencies who are supposed to do what they're supposed to do, we need to come on board and get these things right. And number for roads are very dark. It's very dark. Motorists cannot see properly during the night. So these are things that we have to look into and get these things right, get the roads safer in order to really cut down on what is happening now.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I hear you agreeing there, Andrea Gordon.
Yes.
I hear you shaking your head as well on the point. Saw you shaking your head as well on the point about drivers and people who are employing drivers, making sure that they do the proper checks. How much of an issue is this for you in the industry itself? Because you have to pay out claims when people are involved in accidents.
What we find, there is a lot of ignorance of the road code. So there is need for that awareness. As we say in Jamaica, people buy the license. A lot of people buy the license. And sometimes a lot of the drivers, especially we find with the taxi owners, they don't screen the drivers who they employ. They don't screen them properly. So they have them and they're racking up these long tickets, as we've seen in the news, you know, mounds and mounds of ticketed offenses, you know, and it's reckless behavior, and they're harming people, they're hurting people, and then they run away, you can't find them, you know. So it's like they're getting away with the mayhem, you know, and it's really very sad. It's really, really very sad. So I do agree that we need to, the owners need to take greater responsibility for the vehicles and to whom that they are entrusting their vehicles to.
Let's talk about that issue of driver education. We're going to be emphasizing it more in the next segment, but I want to touch on it here, the Deidre Hudson Sinclair, because that's one of the important issues as well. Why is it so important?
Well, it's critical for we call road safety, you know, education, because one, using the roadway, maneuvering the roadway correctly is a matter of life and death. And when it comes to motor vehicles, we recognize that we have in the past learned habits from friends, from families. They're ones teaching us, but they haven't necessarily been practiced in defensive driving. And, you know, the act speaks to looking at schools and having persons instructed in a specific way. Now, we recognize that this will come with time, but we have recognized that we cannot rely on your father, your daddy teaching you, or your mother, or a friend, especially when it comes to motorcyclists. We have recognized the need that one, some level of certification has to go on. A development of a curriculum has already been done, and it's a matter of execution, ensuring that the necessary parties in government are aligned to execute this particular function of certifying schools. And, you know, it's there in the act, and persons can read the regulation and see that it's there. And it's important for us as citizens to buy into that. And I know when it comes to me as a citizen, when I hear a new thing about, oh, this certificate, this is going to be money. But what this translates to is when we recognize the need to, one, have certified driving schools, have certified drivers, and ensuring that what we are learning is correct, especially on the principles of defensive driving, it should translate into one more, better road usage, less carnage. And the cost on the latter end in terms of fatalities and injuries and hospital costs, we should be able to reap that benefit. So it's a critical component that we recognize. And I know persons are like, yeah, we take too long. But you know, when we are looking at other developing countries, we are far away in terms of adopting certain elements, in terms of certain regulations, and we're moving apace to get there. But it's absolutely critical that what we learn and who teaches us that they're certified and what we are learning is able to protect us on the roadway. And it's a critical component of the act, and you know it will be implemented.
If you see me looking down, the reason is because we have been, as we said, on the JN General Insurance Twitter page. We're live tweeting. We're also streaming on JN's YouTube platform as well. And so you can use the hashtag at Road Safety JA. You can actually, that's not the hashtag. The hashtag is JNGI for Road Safety, and hashtag just slow down, but you can also include, of course, the handles of the different agencies that are part of this discussion this evening, including Call JAA, that's Jamaica Automobile Association, JNGI Jamaica, the JN Foundation, and the Jamaica Constabulary Force. Again, the hashtag is JNGI for Road Safety and hashtag just slow down. You can share your tweets and your comments as well. And I'm seeing one comment here that I'm just going to take before we wrap this discussion and move to segment 2. And it's from Jean Garwood, who says, why do so many people drive with bright, blinding headlights, even at dusk? Superintendent Watson, also a problem that you're seeing as well, I imagine.
Yes, this is something, it's all about education, because the road code strictly informs us that in built-up areas, in lighted areas, you drive when you dip. But it seems as if persons would even be driving on bright lights and don't even realize. And I have noticed that even after lighting up hours, at times persons are driving without the red lights. So it's all about persons not concentrating on what they are doing, or they are not reading, they are not revisiting the road code to remember the basics of operating a motor vehicle. And this is something constant. So it's about continuing to remind persons that half an hour after sunset, it's lighting up time until half an hour before sunrise. So these things we have to be continue relate to persons operating motor vehicles until they get it once and for all.
No, thank you. I want to thank the persons who participated in segment 1, but the discussion is far from over. So indeed, as we're finding out, the situation is frightening on our roads, and there is need for urgent interventions. We've seen where the House of Representatives recently passed the Road Traffic Amendment Act, which will allow for the implementation of long-awaited road traffic regulations. After the upper house, the Senate also signs off on it. At this time, I'm going to be moving to segment 2. We're going to be looking at some of the possible solutions. We hinted at one important one there at the end of that segment, which is driver education. We're going to be looking at a wider range of solutions that will assist in navigating the existing issues. So I want to thank, in particular, Andrea Gordon Martin. We're going to be inviting you back to the third segment. But in this segment, joining us in this segment in particular is going to be Ms. Dial Wiley, who is manager of the Driving Academy at the Jamaica Automobile Association, as we move the discussion to talking about solutions. So we've heard all of the different problem areas. We've heard of some of the different challenges that we're having on the road, but now we're going to be talking about some of the solutions. And we started in the last segment talking a little bit, towards the end of the last segment, talking a little bit about driver education. And I want to begin by introducing Dale Wiley here and having you comment first on that. Well, this question of driver education, how important it is to sort of changing what we're seeing on the roads.
Hi, thank you, Archibald. Good evening, everyone. So yes, driver education is paramount. Here at JAA, the seeing drivers, licensed drivers coming in and not knowing basic road code, just uses. I mean, they talk about the lights, we talk about how to use a roundabout. People just don't know the road code on a whole. It is extremely unfortunate that we see this every day. We have an advanced driver training program that we have for licensed drivers. We teach them defensive driving, and it really is unfortunate just how many people come to us who are really clueless about driving, but they've been driving for almost 20, 30 years sometimes, and they don't know the road code. It's unfortunate, yeah. We talk about the bad habits, and we talk about parents or family members, spouses teaching their family members to drive. Not a good idea, because of course there is just the exchange of bad habits. You don't know why you make the left turn the way you do. You don't know how to use the roundabout, and you simply pass that incorrect knowledge on to the person who is learning how to drive. So it really is just not the ideal way. Of course, we teach learner drivers as well. And so it is important for us to ensure that we teach them the right way, and JAA has the requisite resources to include our certified driver instructors who can pass on the knowledge the correct way. And that's really what is needed.
I want to talk in a moment a little bit about some of the services that you provide, which are really important to driver education. But let me just bring in Mrs. Hudson Sinclair right here on this point of the importance of driver education to talk about some of the interventions that can be implemented from a sort of educational perspective to urge people, to get them to adhere to the road code and the Road Traffic Act. What can we actually do? What should we be doing?
Well, the first thing, is finding a driver education from a reputable institution. That's one of the first things we can do. And one of the other things, about driving psychology is, when we are driving, persons are more caught up with, this is the law, you don't want to break this law, and that is important. But really, for persons to really drive well, they have to have a level of altruism, in the sense that being kind, being patient, because oftentimes when we see persons doing something wrong or driving too slow, sometimes what the person is experiencing on the other side of driving, when they're maneuvering, whether they don't know where it is that they're going. And when you don't know where you're going, you have to drive slow, because you have to assess your environment and decide where you want to turn. We have to recognize that, people themselves are going through bad days, bad experiences, and it often affects their driving behavior. And then when we come in and compound the situation, because the person isn't driving, doing what they ought to be doing, what our expectation, and we aren't allowing for that person to maneuver the roadway, giving them the space. We just want to cut round and go around and go on about our business. So what we tell persons is that when they're driving, the space they're in, their mentality has a lot to do with how they function on the roadway. In terms of driving tips for persons, as from road safety, we recognize that with technology, distraction is a very, it's a big issue. And it's an issue that we find difficult to maneuver, because when we had headphones, we could see certain things. You're having your earphones, or you're having a big set on your ears. Now it's little earbuds in your ear. You don't know if the other driver is seeing you, hearing you. We have entertainment systems in vehicles. So we want to recognize the fact that with proper driving education, you're going to get crucial tips that's going to save your life, in terms of how close do you sit to a steering wheel. We notice that a lot in terms of female drivers sitting up very close. It's unfortunate, but that is what we're seeing and we're observing. We recognize situations where persons in the back think it's okay not to wear, protective devices, don't have their seatbelts on. We recognize the fact in the terms of, child restraint. Why is it important for you to have your child restrained? You restrained yourself at the front. Why wouldn't you not offer the same level of safety to your child? So we recognize that these issues, people, they are there daily. However, the transmission of this from a parent who is teaching them may not happen as readily because that circumstances didn't pop up at that time. So when we have structured education through varied scenarios to help persons not only deal with protective devices, but the environment they're driving in, the type of weather, how you maneuver in the rain, when it's dark, when you can't see, when to use your hazard lights. All these things are critical, and it's important that one, they're structured, they're delivered in a structured way. And one, your mom and dad may not be retaining all of this, your cousin may not be retaining all of this to help you. So these are tips that when we recognize these things happening in our data, we try to put out tweets, we try to put out flyers, we try to engage persons on that level, to ensure that they are getting the information. But always a recommendation is to find reputable institutions that can go through these varied scenarios for driving, not only driving behavior for yourself emotionally, but driving techniques that are critical, learning about the mechanics of a vehicle, stopping distance, and how that relates to your environment and the type of environment that you're driving in, and how that environment, whether slippery roads, can diminish your ability to brake. So all of these, it's wide, it's never, and then it's a, what we call, it's not an exhaustive list. But as we grow, as we learn, it's important for us to have a critical base to look at the mechanics, to look at our emotional needs as a driver, what are the techniques we need to always have when we're driving, and also to drive for the people around us, and that means driving defensively. So
those are some of the things that we actually need to learn. And you say we need to learn in a structured way. In a structured way, you mean, is this public, in a public structured way? Is this like what you might see in the United States, like driver's ed, or are you only talking about like private sector, like the Jamaica Automobile Association?
Well, the ministry is revamping the road code and the learning guide. So we will be giving and offering that information to persons. When we have ratified it and published it, it will be offered to persons online so they can go and learn, as well as they could also get access to it physically if they would want. So yes, the government has to have these books done and have it available for public use. But there are also techniques that may not always be readily put in public, because we are really helping you to ensure that you are breaking any laws, ensure that you're following the road code, and that is absolutely critical. But there's always advantages of having other elements in terms of your driving skill that can be brought on by, you can facilitate through other companies. But learning on your own is very good. However, you always need to seek guidance from someone who is certified and person who has a good reputation and a good driving history.
One of those agencies would be the Jamaica Automobile Association. But before we get to you, just a second, I want to bring in Superintendent Watson here, because when you talk about structured education, I know you're also working in schools in terms of trying to spread the word of what's proper driving. What should people actually be doing? What exactly are you doing? You're muted, Superintendent.
Sorry about that. Well, at PSTEM, our road safety unit continue to perform the lectures at school. And so far this year...
Just a PSTEM, so that's the public
safety and traffic enforcement branch. Okay. Yes. So we have a structured road safety unit here. And so far this year, they have conducted 90 lectures at schools where over 15,000 children benefited, and over 900 adults would have benefited from these lectures. And this is something we take seriously, because we know that from that young age, once it is cemented, they will always remember that when you even approach a road, you got to look properly look left, look right, look left again and cross. We encourage them to cross only at the crosswalks. And if they are not any crosswalks, ask an adult to assist you across the road. And if you realize, sometimes adults will even take more chances than the kids, because the kids will adamant that, mommy, we need to use the pedestrian crossing. And we have seen that from time to time. So we continue to do what we are doing, and we think it is successful. We are getting some success from these road safety lectures.
So we know there's public education from the perspective of the Road Safety Unit, as well as the Road Safety Council, which are different bodies. We know there's work that you are doing from the perspective of the Public Safety and Traffic Enforcement Branch, but we also know from a sort of private sector perspective, we also have the Jamaica Automobile Association. And this Wiley, you provide a range of different kinds of services here, including driver risk assessment, advanced driver training, and learner driver lessons. How important are these kinds of things? First, let's talk a little bit about the driver risk assessment. What does that mean? What do you do?
Okay, so as part of our checks and balance, what it is that really we invite drivers, commercial or private drivers, to come in and actually get tested to see if they are worthy to operate commercial vehicles. So companies will reach out to us and ask us to kind of just validate the drivers that they're about to employ, or the drivers who they have employed already, just to see. I mean, it's unfortunate that some companies do it as kind of like a knee jerk. So after a series of accidents, you know, they may send a driver to be assessed. Well, to me, by that time, it's late, because we already know that there is a deficiency. But nevertheless, it's important that commercial drivers especially are assessed at least every 2 years, because the truth is that they're driving every day. They develop these habits, bad habits. They're driving for profit, as was mentioned before, and shortcuts and that kind of things. That kind of thing creeps in. They forget the road code that they learned 20, 30 years ago. And so it's important that they come in and have that very unbiased assessment. Part of the assessment is actually done on our driving simulator. So it's not even so much about an instructor sitting in a vehicle and giving you instructions. It's more, we put you around this simulator, and we actually watch you drive. We watch you maneuver the vehicle and put you in different scenarios. We simulate like a blowout tire, what you would be able to do, how you respond to that. Are you responding the right way? So it's a series of things that it's a 2-hour assessment that we do on the drivers, just to see if they are competent then. And we give a very detailed scorecard and overview of their performance. And so they can use that both when looking for a job as part of their own, just to show that they are professional drivers and they are competent, as well as we give that report to maybe like a fleet administrator or the HR person, whoever it is. And so they can know that the drivers that they're about to hire, or the drivers who are already on staff, are up to par.
You have driving different levels as well, learner driver and advanced driver.
Right. So we have the learner driver component, and then we have the advanced driver training. So that too, utilizing our main tool, which is the driving simulator. And it's our main tool because, to tell you the truth, it gives us such a different analysis of driving patterns. You could sit with somebody in a vehicle and drive with them for 20, 30 minutes and not really pick up the patterns. But the longer you drive, the more the bad habits creep in. The hole in the steering wheel with the one hand, improper cornering, how you respond to hazards. Do you, can you identify them before? Are you anticipating them? Just a whole host of things. So using the driving simulator, we are able to teach and execute very risky maneuvers, such as correcting a skid, what to do when you get a blowout on the highway driving at 110 kilometers, which can be absolutely dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. So, we are able to recreate those things in a very safe environment. The scenarios are set up where there are people there, but at least they're not real people. So you're not killing real people if you happen to hit somebody in the scenario. But generally speaking, it's an awesome tool that we now have at our disposal to really help in the retraining, because let's be honest, that's where it's all about. We have all these drivers who've been driving for years, not knowing certain basic things. And so we really have to go back to the drawing board and help to retrain. And that's what JAA is really trying to do in a very meaningful way. We are hoping to partner with different organizations so that they too can get some simulation time to help. I mean, just one organization off the top of my head, I'm thinking like the Taxi Association of Jamaica, just to be able to give them an opportunity to learn in an environment where they don't necessarily feel like you're teaching them again, because the egos and all of that, but using it in a very fun, using technology to really kind of get them to have a different appreciation for driving. So that's really what. Sorry?
Sorry to interrupt you. And I was saying we can't end this discussion without talking a little bit about the question of enforcement, because that's really, really key. And I'm seeing some comments as well in the chat. I want to raise them here. I want to say as well that we are going to be taking questions from members of the audience a little later on. I am seeing a question about about that issue of enforcement, saying not dismissing the importance of legal and punitive process. Instead of a fine, force offenders to attend classes and have their driving skills validated before returning them to the road. That comment there is from Conliffe Wilmot Simpson. Also saying that leading indicators such as lectures and guidance are far more important than the lagging indicators such as how many thousand tickets were issued. But of course, that issue of enforcement is important at the same time. Superintendent Watson, where enforcement is concerned, what are some of the initiatives that you are that PSTED is taking to try and tackle that? Because it's a key part. Driver education is a key element, but so is actually holding people to account.
Well, if you notice, we're in the corporate area, it's Kingston and St. Andrew. For most days, and every given day, we are out there in our numbers. And we realize that even at the major intersections, during the peak hour, our men and women are there trying to ensure that these intersections are not clogged. So motorists can have a smooth transition to going to work and from work. You have corridors such as Red Hills Road, Mullines Road. We are there in the peak hour. We are not really enforcing, but we are just trying there to ensure that our presence is there. So it's all about not just say we are enforcing, but we do have to enforce, because what we must know is that it's not necessary that these drivers can't drive properly. But if they believe that they can commit these breaches and get away with them, they will do it. And what is happening is that a number of them, they know exactly that they are not paying the tickets. They have thousands of tickets outstanding. They are not paying them. The warrants are not coming forward. So they continue to create mayhem. They continue to make the decent drivers' lives miserable. So we still have to enforce, but we try our best should make ourselves present in these areas just to prevent the bad driving.
There's a question here. It says, what's been done to reduce the number of law enforcement officers, JCF and JDF, who themselves break the road code, example, overtaking a line of traffic or breaking red lights without the indication of an emergency or sirens? Are they above the law? That's from Orpheus Douglas in the chat.
And I already tell us no, that, sir. No, they are not above the law. And members of the JDF as well as the JCF have been prosecuted more than once. And if they drive unlicensed vehicles, they are taken from them, they are sent to the pound until they comply with the law. But it's difficult for people to know these things. They're not going to know these things, but it does happen. And I must tell you, even going back to even emergency vehicles, the normal police vehicle you see on the road is just deemed to be an emergency vehicle. You know. That vehicle has to be responding to a scene of fire or crime. So the police are not to just go on the outside without any real. A matter of fact, before the police uses the siren, they have to get permission from police control. So you have to inform police control that, listen, there's an emergency, there's a scene of fire, a scene of crime, permission to use the instrument, and permission is given. So it's not just like what they believe, but they are prosecuted. I can tell you, they are prosecuted.
Okay, but people would not necessarily know because there's not what's taking place. I want to, we're going to be closing this discussion in a couple of minutes, but I want to go to one other issue. That issue of enforcement in a second, but let me just ask a quick question about enforcement right there. So Deidre Hudson Sinclair, enforcement is one of the key things that the legislation is actually trying to do as well. How are you trying to improve enforcement?
Well, you know, we recognize that in every major city around the world, you know, technology is being leveraged to really respond to one, identifying breaches, reporting the breach, and ensuring that the necessary persons who are in breach are notified. And the Act speaks to one, utilizing and implementing that technology, and the government in its, you know, is making sure that one, the systems are in place. But as I said, everybody's wondering why it takes so long. The truth is that the police mechanism, when they're electronically taking a ticket now, it has to speak to the Island Traffic Authority, who is also receiving the information about one, points being added, and then what happens with those points. And also we want to ensure that one, that is not a matter of just, you know, collecting tickets and then the actual action of one, suspending a license doesn't happen. And, you know, with the new regulations for the Island Traffic Authority giving them certain powers to suspend, you know, that's a part of this process. And also recognizing that one, not a police cannot be at every street corner. So we would love them to be. We'd surely feel safer, things would move smoother. So one, ensuring that legislation is there is critical, and it is there, and it will take some level of mechanism and technology leveraging that to ensure that it comes in place. But we have to once again make sure all these things are seamlessly put in place, all the organizations that are involved, not only the JCF, but the Ministry of National Security, because these things aren't necessarily only for traffic. It has other legal and, you know, ramifications across the board and leveraging for other security uses. So yes, the plans are there, things are in place, and we are now beginning to, after the Act, we'll begin to leverage those things to see how best we can, one, not only improve traffic, but have a safer environment. And while we're seeing the little pop-up about warrants are slow to come, well, that once again is the transmission of data.
Let me read it for you so you can respond to it. The warrants
just came up in front of
with the bad drivers on the road. When we install the cameras at the various intersections and stoplights, what will be different in holding these drivers accountable?
Well, you see, that's the thing. When it comes to paper data, and the same thing that I have, once we're moving from paper to electronic, one, assessing, sorting, and identifying becomes easier. But it also we have to also recognize that the public has to play their part in one, giving the data when we are registering, and that also has a lot to do with Island Traffic Authority, with the registration, having registration separated from licensing, and that's a thing that's now a part of, the act, and understanding that yes, that all of these things have to seamlessly speak to each other, and once again, we've mentioned national security and the court system. They're also involved in the process to ensure that that paper backlog that would be there, because we don't have the manpower to sort, to read, to collect, and issue. And that is that is dealt with in the act, and we'll be putting in a mechanism in place for us to follow through on that. So
that sounds like a massive amount of work.
It is, and that's why it's been taking this long. It takes major parties across the board. Transport cuts through almost every sector, including health. So we understand and we know, and it is coming. However, it takes time to ensure that. But things are happening in the background. We are meeting daily, weekly, to ensure that we're all speaking to each other, because I know lots of people don't think that the police speaking to IT, but we are. And we can tell you, even for us, if somebody talk about assessing assessing drivers, we here on the Island Traffic Authority, because Road Safety Unit is under the Island Traffic Authority, who is under the ministry. And we have now taken it upon ourselves to assess our own drivers, assess how many tickets they have. Should they be suspended? Now we are talking with other entities to see, okay, this is how it's going to work. So fret not. We know we're taking long, but it will happen, and it is happening. And I am proud to be a government civil servant. I'm proud to be a worker, because I'm seeing what's happening, and we are making our strides. I know it's taking a longer time than usual, but we're getting there.
There's much more to this discussion. We're going to bring up some of those points in our next segment, and we're about to head to the next segment. But before we get there, there is, it's one thing to talk about enforcement and public education, which have been the major parts of this discussion. And we see your questions and comments, by the way, in the chat. We see them on the social media platforms. We're going to be taking them, so please keep them coming. We're going to be, as you've seen so far, we've been sharing them with the panelists, and we'll continue to do that throughout the discussion. And we have a segment just for those questions as well, so please keep them coming. But it's important to understand that in the beginning, you need to have a good vehicle on the road. So Dale Wiley, let's talk about that as we close this discussion. Vehicle maintenance, because a lot of people, whether we see these cars driving, cars and vans, etc., driving with mountains of smoke behind them, or tires, or, that's a crucial aspect to road safety as well.
For sure, it is. And the truth of the matter is that here in Jamaica, there are a lot of vehicles that don't pass that fitness test. They don't even make it to the depot, much less. But that's a different conversation, okay? But the truth of the matter is that a lot of the vehicles out there have a whole lot of deficiencies. Just last night, I was in a near-miss situation with a truck that had no headlight, zero, at 9 o'clock in the night on a busy thoroughfare like Constant Spring Road. So I wasn't like it. I mean, he was just driving like it was broad daylight. It was just, I could not believe what I was seeing. He had no lights whatsoever. And usually the truck that's guilty of that is usually a garbage truck, but it wasn't a garbage truck. It was a commercial truck, branded and everything. But anyway, so that just goes to show that it's out there, and it only but makes the situation even more dangerous for us as road users. One of the things that I find is just generally just selfishness, really, because if you're really thinking about others, and that's what we're called to do as road users, we can't drive for ourselves only. We have to drive for the other person. We have to be mindful of the pedestrian. We have to be mindful of the bicycle man that's dilly-dallying and behaving crazy. But the truth of the matter that if we were really a whole lot more cognizant of our own actions and the implications of our actions and our inactions as well, we would recognize that, you know, each of us as road users has an important part to play. And that one of the main roles that we have to play is to ensure that we're operating a vehicle or a motorcycle in the most roadworthy manner.
So having proper light, for instance, that's one, as you highlighted.
Exactly.
What are
having
some of the
proper
others?
lights, braking, making sure that we have our brakes are actually functional. A lot of times we don't service our brakes. That is crucial, because one of the things is that we need to ensure that our vehicles are also maintained frequently, not based on time. It's usually better to maintain your vehicle based on mileage. Okay, so let's not go by servicing your vehicle every 6 months. You can't service your vehicle every 6 months if you're driving to Negril every day or every 2 weeks. That doesn't make any sense. So if you're a traveling officer, you would clearly need to be servicing your vehicle far more frequently than if you are just driving to work and home. You know what I mean? So we have to look at that. It's really every 5,000 kilometers. So we need to make sure that we are following those guidelines. And of course, so there's the general mechanics of the vehicle, but also we need to ensure that we're keeping up to date with the documents of our vehicle, the insurance. I mean, so many people don't know when their insurance expires. They maybe get alerts and they're not paying attention. Same thing with the registration and their fitness. Part of operating the vehicle is understanding that we're called to be responsible in all aspects. And it really is sad. We could go on and on in terms of making sure that, you know, we have the proper tire pressure, etc., etc. But the truth of the matter is we just have to ensure that we take keen interest in what we operate. So if we're operating a motor vehicle, we need to make sure that our tires are good, our brakes are good, our headlights, our indicators, the actual lights working, not just the ones at the front, but the ones at the back as well. And if you see somebody whose brake light is out, you know, it's okay to say to them in traffic or something, hey, your brake light is out, because the truth is we don't know. Sometimes we have nobody to tell us that, you know, only one brake light is working. We really don't know. And many of us with our busy lifestyle, we don't get to check and all of that. So it really, the onus is on us as owners and operators of vehicles to ensure that we do our due diligence to maintain all aspects of our vehicles when on the road, because it really could cost somebody their life. That's really what it boils down to.
And I think there's a tagline: the life you save could be your own. I think that's quite appropriate here as well.
Absolutely.
We're going to be wrapping this discussion and continuing to talk a little bit about the impact in our next segment. So I want to thank Dial Wiley here, as well as Superintendent Winchester Watson. In our next segment, we're going to be hearing from crash survivor Miss Yannick Wilson, and Mrs. Andrea Gordon Martin will return and join us. We'll also be joined by Mrs. Rose Miller, but I want to thank Dial and Superintendent Watson, as well as Deidre Hudson Sinclair, for joining us for this element of the discussion. Thanks so much. We're going to be doing some giveaways now as we prepare to head to part 3 of our discussion. This is essentially a check of whether you've been paying attention. So the first person to comment, to share the correct answer in the chat, will win an Amazon gift certificate valued at $50. And we have 3 questions this evening. First question is, what are the number of road fatalities at July 2022 in Jamaica? That's our first question. So what are the number of road fatalities in Jamaica as at July 2022? What is the number? All right, that's the first question. You know the answer, $50 gift certificate. It's one certificate, right? It's not three. It's 3 certificates?
It's 3 certificates.
Three
Yes.
certificates. So that's the first question.
Yes.
July, no, I just said July 2020.
As of July 2022, right?
Yes, not July 22, but as of July 2022. So what are the number of road fatalities at July 2022 in Jamaica? Said in the first segment. Dante Matthews says, can employees answer? I'm gonna assume the answer to that is no. We have Lakerry Walker who says 287. Is that correct number, I believe? 287. 287. Yes, I think that is the correct number I said in the first segment. I cannot remember my statistics right now, forgive me. But I will check that number, but I believe that is correct, 287 as of, let me get that answer to you, nope, not 287, missed. You're a little off. As of July 13, those were the statistics we had. 2 of those numbers are correct, but one's incorrect. 387? Nope. No one is going to be winning the Amazon gift certificate at this rate. So it's the number of persons who died as of July 13, 2022. Donette Price Thompson says 237. Close. Anyone else? Wayne Plummer says 247. Wayne is the closest so far. You're getting hotter. Why do I have a feeling none of you was taking notes? Okay, so the number of road fatalities. I'm enjoying this. Nobody remembers the actual number. Eddie Thorpe, there's Eddie Thorpe, says 246. Eddie Thorpe says 234. All of these are wrong. It isn't, I'll give you one clue. It's in the 240s. All right, so it's Lakerry Walker, the winner. First correct answer in the chat is 247. So it's Lakerry Walker, 247, the number of road fatalities at July 13, 2022. And then I have a second question. So there's still an opportunity to win another Amazon gift certificate. And the question is, what is the number 1 cause of road crashes in Jamaica? All right, that one you got out of the bat. I think this is Orpheus Douglas saying high speed. We'll accept that. That's speeding, number 1 cause. So Orpheus Douglas, congratulations, Orpheus. And question number 3, what is the name of the crash survivor who is going to be speaking in our next segment? That's question number 3. No, Nikisha, did you know this question was coming up? Because I feel like I just uttered it and the answer came up in the chat. So it's Yannick Wilson, Nikisha Scott Mason, that's the correct answer as well. So congratulations to all the persons who've won so far. And thank you as well for paying attention to our discussion, really, really important discussion that we're having this evening. And importantly, you pointed out by answering the final question that in this segment, which we're going to know, we're going to be hearing from Yannick Wilson, who is a crash survivor, Mrs. Rose Miller, who is grants manager at the JN Foundation, as well as Mrs. Andrea Gordon Martin, who's going to be rejoining this panel. So we're going to be discussing the aftermath of road crashes, and we're going to be having that one-on-one discussion with Ms. Wilson, who was involved in an accident in 2018 and has been an advocate rather for road safety since then. And I want to welcome her to share her story. So Yannick, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your story. Really, really important for us to understand the impact that road crashes have on individuals. Tell us what happened to you.
Thank you so much for having me. In 2018, I was leaving work. It was the 25th of May, so, you know, that's payday. I worked in Kingston, so I was leaving work to head home to Riddle's side. I went in a taxi because I was taking taxi at the time. I went into a taxi and he overtook a line of traffic, so he disobeyed, right? When he overtook the traffic, he met upon some police officers, right? And they were like face to face with each other. Instead of reversing and, you know, going to the back of the line, what he did was he reversed. And I think he was trying to trick the police officers into thinking that he was actually going to the back of the line. What he did instead was he reversed a little and then he went around the police car and he took myself and 1, 2, 3, and 3 other passengers in the vehicle on a tour of Kingston. I mean, I can smile about it now because, you know, I'm looking back at the situation. But what he did was he overtook several other lines of traffic. He broke several stoplights. He was, it was basically something that you see in the movies, or probably if you're playing a game like Grand Theft Auto. You know, he was just going, he was hitting people's cars, people's side mirrors, everything. And the police, they were still chasing us. So in the vehicle the entire time, you know, we were pleading with him, begging him to just pull over, you know. The police don't have to see you, just pull over into this plaza, something that would, you know, get his mind. But the entire time he was just saying why they had to choose today, you know, my gas is low, and he was just going off on a rant of his own. And finally, we collided into a vehicle right in front of Mega Mart. So when the accident finally stopped, you know, the police, they actually drove off. So they didn't even stop to see if everybody was okay. They drove off, and it was some good Samaritans that actually helped us out of the vehicle. And I remember one of their names, I wanted to pick him up publicly, Dale Clark. He was the driver of the vehicle. And for me personally, my right hand and my right leg, they were broken. So I was trying to get up from outside of the car, but because I was in the middle of the passenger seat, the back, I was unable to move because 2 other persons were, you know, on either side. So when they finally got out those persons, they were trying to take me out of the car, but my leg was broken, like it was crushed. Later on down, I found out that it was a comminuted fracture, which is where the femur actually crushes in 2. So it's not like a clean split. There were little splinters of bone. Sorry, it's a little graphic. There were little splinters of bone that that were there. So I don't know how I was able to be so so focused. So, you know, but I told them that I think my leg is broken and my hand as well. So, you know, one person is going to have to hold me by my shoulder while somebody comes around the other side and kind of pulls or pushes my leg towards, you know, the direction that they're pulling me. So when they put me onto when they finally got me into the car and they put me onto the pedestrian, the sidewalk, I remember just feeling so tired and thirsty. I was asking them, did anybody have any water? And I really just wanted to sleep. Out of nowhere, I remember this lady, this brown lady with bright blonde hair. I don't know her name, But she was running towards me. She was saying, no, don't let her sleep. Take her to the hospital. And later on, I found out that if I had actually gone to sleep, I would have probably been in a coma. So I am happy to be here, sharing my story. And yeah, that's what happened. That drive to the hospital was the longest drive in my entire life. That's when I actually found out that there were so many potholes in Jamaica. Before, I didn't even know. But with every pothole that we dropped into, I felt it. Every pebble, every stone that we went over, and they were going at probably like 10 or 20. So they weren't even going fast, So yeah.
Wow. I don't even know what to say. That is an amazing story. Wow. First of all, thank you for sharing it. It is, I know it's very, very difficult for you, but it is important for people to understand that there is an impact that is beyond, cash, really, an impact on actual people involved in the accident. I wanted to ask, when you had to go through, when you went to the hospital itself now, and you have to deal with sort of recuperating, what was that experience like?
Luckily I had persons by my side. So I didn't really have to do much. Everybody else kind of took care of everything for me. My father, he drove. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, if you need a moment, we completely understand that. This is clearly a lot. We're just gonna give Yannick a moment because obviously this is a lot. And the human impact of traffic accidents, it's far beyond the statistics itself. It's far beyond, the damage to vehicles, but clearly an impact on individuals themselves. I know we're going to give Yannick a moment, and perhaps when she, has gathered herself, I actually want to ask her in a second about how that moment sort of impacted how she, relates in traffic and so forth, because we have seen that. We do know that trauma lives on in us, and all of us, we struggle to survive these things and to deal with it. And speaking of this sort of impact of beyond the numbers themselves and beyond the impact on the vehicles and on the insurance industry, I know that I want to bring in here Mrs. Miller from the Jane Foundation, which funded, as we heard earlier, a cost of care report, which was conducted by the Violence Prevention Alliance. Now, I remember this report being presented in Parliament several years ago as a reporter. The University of the West Indies, the University Hospital of the West Indies, and the Mona Geoinformatics Institute were the other partners in the conduct of that report. And it showed that the country was spending an amazing amount of money to treat injuries from violence and road fatalities. I remember, as a matter of fact, that it came up in Parliament, and it was actually the lead story on primetime news. Can you share some of what was found in that report?
Thank you, Archibald. Good evening, everyone. And I can well imagine when that came up in Parliament, we could hardly believe what we were hearing because the numbers were so significant. And it remains that way. And the figures I'm going to be sharing goes all the way back to 2014. So those millions and billions you heard earlier, just think 2014, and we're now in 2022. So difference in what all that is about. But the cost of care study, as we know it, it was commissioned by the Jane Foundation and the National Health Fund with other partners. And it spoke to violence prevention and also road crash. And also suicide was also a part of it. So it was three-pronged to come up with the actual figures as to what the country was spending treating with these three categories of injuries. And so what the report showed us was that the average cost for treating with an injury from a pedestrian point of view was $166,000 per person. For the bicycle rider, that was $116,000 per person. For the motorcyclist, we're up to $263,000 per person. And for injuries ascertained in motor vehicles, motor cars, that's $94,000 per person. I just want to take us to one example, which was explained in the report, and it has to do with a young man with no long-term diseases. He was employed, and he met in an accident from a motorcycle. And the cost for his care, which is what I'm going to be sharing now. So he was 24 years old, no chronic illnesses. He was employed. He was hit by a motor car while he was riding his motorcycle. He was not wearing a helmet, and he was taken to the hospital in a taxi. So those are some of the basic elements. While he was in the emergency room, of course, he had to be doing x-rays and hook up with IV fluids and blood tests and all of that. He spent 33 days in intensive care unit. And as it turned out, that was the most expensive part of the treatment. So you have other things like CAT scan and so on, $500,000. You have the theater use. Of course, it's an emergency, so that was a whopping $500,000. He stayed on the ward for a couple of days, and that was $265,000. Feeding tube and all of those things, $270,000. For transfusion, $252,000. Physiotherapy, which is also another huge bill, $320,000. And x-rays and disposables and all of that were up to a whopping $5.62 million. $5.562 million.
More than you probably earn when you're 24.
Yes, we're talking about one person to treat that one injury. $5.56 million. And then there's aftercare, and then there is a component which relates to indirect costs. All of those were direct hospital costs. And those direct costs does not include like salaries for the healthcare workers. So it's just basic medical procedures and so on. Direct costs, $5.562 million. And by the time you have put in the indirect costs, which speaks mostly to loss of income and so on. And the study used a very basic, in fact, it used the minimum wage, assuming that he would have worked until 65. He was 24 when the accident happened. So there was another $3.6 million in there for that. We're at $9.272 million to treat a cyclist. And we're still talking 2014, sorry. So it's an astounding figure, Archibald and team and our viewers. And so you also heard Dr. Dixon spoke about the cost on the economy. What could we do with this whole ton of money that we're spending each year to take care of these costs? 1% or so of GDP every year is spent on just taking care of crash victims. And we don't really call them accidents because, you know, the correct terminology is crash victims. A lot of these crashes are preventable. And so in that same study, the direct cost was $1.4 billion. That was 19% of the Ministry of Health's budget for goods and services.
That's about a fifth, close to a fifth of the budget.
19% of the entire budget for the Ministry of Health. And remember, we're just talking about road crashes alone. And then that's roughly about 8% of the hospital's budget. So a lot of money is being used up because of indiscipline and everything else that goes with the poor driving on our roads. But then we also need to factor in some other costs. which sometimes you really can't put a dollar figure to, and the study did not actually go into that. But of course, there's a cost for infrastructure, because very often infrastructure is damaged during these crashes. And so we again have to use money from the government coffers to repair those infrastructure. Then the emotional trauma for families and friends, and indeed the persons who have been directly affected. There's no dollar value you can add to something like that. And especially if the disability is permanent, then that's another story all by itself. And there's the disruption of the family when somebody passes because of these road crashes. Then we also have to look at what's happening with the hospital workers. They are forever being bombarded with these emergencies. And so it is just so traumatic to go to work, because they're constantly coming in. You have to treat with them. And it really just puts you in a very, very bad light. And emotionally, you're all stressed out.
And I think it's important not to cut you to remember as well that we're talking about an opportunity cost here.
That's correct.
So that's an emergency, which
that's correct.
means that other kinds of services that are offered in hospitals have to be put aside, because you'd have to deal with the victims or someone involved in a traffic crash.
There you go. Could not have put it better. That was going to be my next point. So people's procedures have to be delayed, rescheduled, and all of that just to facilitate this emergency that has happened in the hospitals. The study was carried out in 7 hospitals: Kingston Public, University Hospital, Mayhem, Spanish Town, Cornwall Regional, and also Bustamante Hospital. And it really is very shocking, because 13,000 accidents happened in 2014. And that was a $3.2 billion price tag between indirect cost and direct cost. And so we can't urge our citizens enough to take care on the roads. We have to drive for everybody around us, not just ourselves. We have to be patient. We have to be altruistic, I think was the word I hear Mrs. Hudson used. Well put. Because when we treat the other motorists like we want them to treat us, then everybody's going to be more careful. And so this bill is going to be divided way down so that we can actually use some of our resources to take care of other very urgent things in our economy and with our country, with our citizens, so that as a Jamaican populace, we can all benefit from the resources that we have.
I think I want to go back to that question there and bring Yannick back into the conversation here, because one of the important things that as you pointed out, Mrs. Miller, that you can't put a price tag on is the trauma itself. So I want to bring Yannick back in here and ask her a little bit about that. Clearly, a lot to deal with from that perspective. We saw the impact a little earlier on as she recounted the story. And I wanted to know, Yannick, and first of all, there's a lot of support for you. You hear a lot of people in the chat saying they're proud of you, thanking God, just that you are alive and, reflecting on what you went through. But I wanted to ask how did that affect you when you went on the road, on your road yourself? Because just listening to it, and I'm just listening to it, that sounds like a lot. How did that impact how you traveled, how you felt when you were traveling?
Yeah, apologies for earlier. Well, for me, it took a while for me to be able to get back into a white vehicle. However, only certain people or a few persons were able to, drive me, because I wasn't going to take a taxi. So even going back to work was a little challenging. I had to, because when the accident happened, I moved back home to St. Anne, and I was working in Kingston at the time. But luckily, I had some really great bosses at the time. So they were like, don't worry about anything, just focus on getting better. When you come back, your job will be here waiting for you. So I was like, all right, cool. and actually went back to work on crutches because I was just so tired of being laid up in bed. I was in bed for 6 months before I was able to, get out of the wheelchair and start using crutches because it was both my right hand and my right leg that were broken. So when I got back to work, I hired a taxi driver who would take me to work with his family. So that was a little safer, most times it would just be me, myself and him in the car. Other times it would be his wife or his children, and that was fine. Outside of that, if I had to go to the supermarkets, I would call one of my friends that drives and ask, them to bring me. I would take Nutsford Express. Just the fact of, or the thought of going out to take a regular taxi would traumatize me. So that pushed me to learn how to drive and to get my driver's license. So no, you cannot get me to go into another taxi. And I'm very careful when traversing the road, very aware of my surroundings. When I get into the car, I close the door because I know we're in Jamaica. Lots of things happen. It's not only accidents that we have to worry about on the road. So no, it's not as bad 4 years later. Just talking about it kind of,
Understandably. I mean, again, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story. I know it's a lot for you, really important for people to understand what happens though, because so often we hear the statistics, but we don't put faces to them, we really don't understand those stories. I want to bring in Mrs. Andrea Gordon-Martin here to talk a little bit about the insurance perspective as well, because we know that with the accidents, the claims process can be quite tedious. And there's been a big push for a lot of people in terms of, implementing dash cams, for instance, to ensure that they have evidence when they are involved in that sort of claims process. First of all, why does it take so long? Sometimes, not all the time, but why does it sometimes take so long?
Archibald, a big problem that we have in the industry is when there's an accident and we have to recover from the other party, who we refer to as the third party. That process is long and tedious because people are often not truthful, and I'm gonna be frank, about how accidents occur. Sometimes, after an accident, as you see the trauma Yannick went through, sometimes people may genuinely don't remember the facts, but a lot of the times too is ignorance of the law. They're not aware of the road code, and they believe that they're right when they're not right. And a lot of people don't want to speak the truth either because they believe it will affect their no claim discount if they're at fault in an accident. So dash cams, it's a wonderful invention, and the industry encourages dash cams because it helps us to determine when persons are liable in an accident. I know the industry, we're actually looking at how we can incentivize persons to use the dash cam because not many people are using it, but it's something that we encourage people to use because it will allow us to settle the claims faster, because once we can establish liability quickly, then there's no delay or less delay in settling claims and settling claims fairly. So it's something that we really encourage. Another thing too, we have fraud is a very big problem for the industry, and it will help us in that area as well, because sometimes based on the imagery and so on, you can know, for example, how many persons may be in the other vehicle. So it will prevent persons trying to immerse themselves into an accident in order to make a claim, because then I would know there were only 2 persons in the vehicle and not 3 or 4 or 5, So we're plagued with fraud, and that kind of fraud where people are immersing themselves in accidents, in order to make a claim, and the dash cam can help in that regard as well. So it's a wonderful, wonderful tool. And I would encourage everyone to install a dash cam.
We're close to the end of this discussion, and we are taking questions from members of the audience, and there's actually one in the chat right now. So we're going to roll straight into that. And the question from Brian Miller in the chat is, will you reduce our premiums if we install dash cams?
And that's what I just said. The industry is actually looking at it now, because it's something that we're seriously thinking about, how to incentivize our policyholders if they use a dash cam. So it's coming. It's coming.
All right. So thank you so much. I think people will be very encouraged by that. There are other questions where we're going to be taking questions from you right now. I know there are questions earlier in the chat. There's one right here, comment down here. Well, Brian Miller is responding to your comment, saying that it's good to hear.
Yes, Brian.
A lot of messages of support for you, Yannick. Thank you so much for sharing that story again. We're going to be allowing Yannick to sort of really close this discussion for us and to sort of, help us to have a sort of context of the importance of, road safety overall from the personal perspective. And as we do that, we're going to ask a sort of chat, for the final survey rather to be put in the chat. So before we wrap the discussion, because we really want people to ensure that they take part in the survey before you log off the discussion. And as we are doing that, I'm going to ask the team to put the survey in the chat so that people can participate right now instead of logging off. We don't want people to log off without participating in the chat. But Yannick, you said that you want to make a particular kind of plea. You have been there yourselves. You've seen the actual impact of traffic crashes, that's the appropriate term, on individuals and through your own experience.
Funny enough, this wasn't my first accident, but it was the first one that caused such a major impact on my life. And I just have a plea to the road users out there. You don't have to do anything wrong in order to be a victim. You can be a passenger, and if it is, many times I hear my aunt on college say she's in buses and she just have to tell them to pull over because they're just not driving in a way that she's comfortable with. So you could be a passenger, just want the employee to speak up, stop the bus, stop the taxi if you're not comfortable with how they're driving. You could be a pedestrian, just pay attention to your surroundings. Don't just walk haphazardly into the road. Ensure that you look around. Drivers, you aren't only driving for yourself. You're driving for everybody on the road. Be responsible. And I just want to leave this message with everybody. Road safety is everybody's business. We all have a part to play.
Yes, that really, really important message from you, Yannick. I mean, nothing in comparison to the kind of story that you've related. But years ago, I was also involved in a minor accident. So I really do very much understand that importance of, speaking up, because I felt like I didn't speak up at the time. And ever since, if I take public transport, I get off a bus, I get off a taxi, I'm not going to work. I'm not putting going to work over my personal safety at any point.
It's better you're late. It's better you arrive late than arrive dead. And less than what I went through has happened, and persons do not make it. So it doesn't even have to be a serious accident, to be honest. I heard stories of an accident happening in Runner Bay St. Anne, and if you saw the vehicle and if you saw how the accident happened, you'd be like, there is no way that person is dead. But the fact of the matter is, the least little thing could happen and you could not make it. So, just be vigilant out there. It's really rough in these streets.
Mrs. Miller, this question right here of those kinds of messages. I know that the JN Foundation has embarked on several sorts of initiatives and sort of road safety initiatives in order to spread that kind of message and other kinds of messages. What are some of these sorts of initiatives that you're doing?
Yes, we have done many campaigns Archibald, because as you heard before, we have been in the road safety space for a while. We have also worked with FIA and Abertis foundations, as well as UNICEF, to improve crosswalks across Jamaica, where schools are located. We have also built out laybys, provided for speed bumps. So we call them rumble strips. So they are placed in the road near the schools so that the motorists will have to slow down. And we have done some major infrastructure work in schools such as Bridgeport and Landilo in Westmoreland, as well as Holland Primary and Jonathan Grant and so on. So we have focused a lot on schools because they are really part of the very vulnerable population. And that's kind of some of the things that we have done. We have also, in past time, we had JAA junior clubs in schools. Again, they've dealt with advocacy and just general information about road safety and so on. So those are one or two of the things that we have been involved in. There was this really interesting story about a school we worked with in Clarendon, Hazard Primary it was. But we did a mural for that school. We also did the speed bump. We did road safety signs. Of course, wherever you have the crosswalks, then you have the corresponding signs, slow down, and so on and so forth. But when we worked with Hazard Primary, the principal reported not long afterward that while before they were having a problem with population at the school, but when all of that work was done and there was a mural placed on the fence and all of those things, everybody now wanted to come to Hazard Primary. And so, we felt really good about that. And we had done that in conjunction with Abertis Foundation and UNICEF.
Understood. I should say that the survey I mentioned earlier, it is embedded in the chat. It's embedded in the Zoom rather. So it's not going to be placed in the chat. A link will, however, be sent out tomorrow in a thank you email for persons that may miss the survey. It's really, really important to get your feedback on how we can improve these sessions and how we can continue to do this work better and better. So really asking for people to complete the survey when you get it. If you have an opportunity, spend a couple of minutes with us as we wrap this session and do the survey for us. But there are a couple of quick questions in the chat. So we're gonna run a little over, but Mrs. Gordon Martin there says, Orpheus Douglas says, are vehicle safety ratings taken into consideration to determine insurance premiums?
I might want to ask Linford Reese. Linford, you want to take that one for me? Linford is in charge of our distribution.
Repeat the question again, Archibald, please.
Are vehicle safety ratings taken into consideration to determine insurance premiums?
Unfortunately not. It is not taken into consideration. What we try to do is to more rate the user, the driver of that vehicle, as opposed to the vehicle.
Okay. Understood. And there's one more here I think I saw in the chat before we wrap. It was, I'm gonna guess the answer to this is no, but I'll ask it anyway. Gordon Martin. It is will I benefit because my car has a dash cam? Want to know if the benefit that incentive will apply retroactively.
Yes, and we're seriously looking at it. So you will hear from us very, very soon on that. It's something that we're actually looking at now. Yes.
Okay. All right, cool. Thank you. Thank you so much. I want to thank all of you for this, amazing discussion. I want to thank the participants in this section in particular, Mrs. Rose Miller, Andrea Gordon Martin, and Yannick Wilson, who shared that amazing story. I don't even have the words, but we do want to thank you for sharing your story. We know that it took a lot to come and share it with us, but it is really important for people to, as you clearly know and understand, to understand the impact of what has been happening on our streets. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank the participants overall for your surveys. We've now come to the end of another informative discussion on road safety. Stop the Mayhem, Save Lives, brought to you by JN General Insurance. If you pose a question that was not answered, by the way, our team will be monitoring the chat room and social media to answer all of the questions. I want to thank our very knowledgeable and expert panelists, Superintendent of Police Winchester Watson, we heard from him earlier, as well as Mrs. Deidre Hudson Sinclair and Mrs. Andrea Gordon Martin, Ms. Diane Wiley from the Jamaica Automobile Association, Mrs. Rose Miller and Ms. Yannick Wilson. And thank you to our host, Dr. Dana Morris Dixon, for her warm welcome. And most of all, thank you for our guests. Thank you to you who showed up for your attention, for all of the questions, for your comments. Listen out for our other upcoming discussions that JN General Insurance will host. I'm Archibald Gordon. It was my pleasure to be your moderator today. This evening, have a great evening. And again, thank you so much for showing up and taking part.
Thank you.
Thank you, Archibald.
Thank you, Archibald. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening.